This is a presidential portrait. It is for editorial cartoonist Pat Oliphant.
There's so much that's very, very contemporary about a political cartoon. It's really drawn from the popular culture. And so it really gives you a lot of backstory about the culture in which that president was operating, in which those decisions were being made.
In a democracy, we have the freedom to criticize, to ridicule, indeed, to figuratively eviscerate the very presidents we elect. Being the #1 target of editorial cartoonists is a price one pays for the honor.
I think to some extent, if Pat Oliphant is going after you, that means that you're a pretty big fish.
Fishing has been very good for Oliphant, who emigrated from Australia to the United States in 1964.
That was right in the middle of the Johnson-Goldwater campaign. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was just, you know, I came from Australia where nothing happens. Be right in the middle of everything was going on.
8 presidents later, Oliphant is still in the middle of everything that's going on. And he's never suffered for lack of good material.
Maybe it's the wrong people running. We can't get people who should be running to run. I mean, who would want the job? It seems doomed to failure as soon as they're elected. Stupid, isn't it?
Political cartoons have been stirring things up in these United States pretty much from the beginning. Even the imposing Andrew Jackson was portrayed as a crazy dancer and a madman riding a pig. Although the effect of these cartoons was satirical, they are pretty dense for modern tastes.
A lot of the lithographic cartoons of the mid-century are very text-heavy, lots of little dialogue balloons, lots of little characters, and some fairly obscure political issues. So they're very difficult for us to understand today.
One man was about to change all that. For a few weeks out of every year, German-born cartoonist Thomas Nast turns his attention to Santa Claus. Nast created the classic character we know today. But the same talent that delighted children at Christmas tormented public officials. In the early 1860s, President Andrew Johnson was relentlessly portrayed by Nast as a Roman emperor, a Shakespearean villain, and a glowering king.
And I think what Nast did so successfully was to boil things down to the sort of single graphic concept that we can still understand and that still has resonance.
Someone once said that if the term nasty had not already been in use, the word would have been coined to describe his work. But the pen that skewered Andrew Johnson and many others may have helped Ulysses S. Grant.
Nast treated Grant very kindly in the election of 1868. So when he went to Washington in early 1872, he was wined and dined, and he went to the White House. He met Grant, and they really got along.
Nast found Grant to be the real thing, and his watercolor for the English Vanity Fair magazine shows a seemingly trustworthy, affable man in an unusually relaxed pose for a president. Grant's opponent in the 1872 elections, Horace Greeley, didn't fare so well with Nast.
He really turns him into a ridiculously hideous little troll, and in truth, it's much more fun when he's being bitingly satiric. But I think both those types of imagery, they must have had an impact.
In Pat Oliphant's world, once our presidents are elected, they don't fare much better.
Well, I think our expectations are very high. We're going to put one person in charge of a whole lot of problems, and we really think we've got the right one this time, or a majority of us do. There is a little bit of a honeymoon where your hopes are very high.
For Oliphant, the honeymoon never lasts very long. and his presidents devolve accordingly.
So LBJ sort of sags and ages, and George H.W. Bush kind of weakens. Carter just shrinks, and Clinton sweats, and Nixon bloats. I mean, it's really an extraordinary cast of characters, very compelling.
I enjoyed LBJ. He had a gallbladder surgery or a hysterectomy or something, I don't know. In his own inimitable way, he showed us the scar. It was wondrous to me. A cartoonist's delight. There was nothing to like with Nixon. He was a wonderful dragon to slay. He was central casting for a villain, and I accepted it. He was vengeful, plotting, everything you think a president shouldn't be.
For a while, Oliphant worried he'd hit a cartooning snag with Gerald Ford.
Jerry Ford was an eminently decent man.
Until he started tripping down the stairs.
He used to fall downstairs a lot and bang his head on helicopters. And so that was another opportunity to have fun with a politician.
Gerald Ford was an athletic and virile, strong man. How does he then become thought of as a bumbling sort of character? Well, you can't help but think that a Band-Aid on his head, every time you see him in a Pat Oliphant cartoon, doesn't have some way of reinforcing the public's feeling that this guy was a little clumsy.
Apparently, President Ford harbored no ill feelings. After he left office, he personally invited Oliphant to draw at an annual dinner he had for staff and friends.
And I don't know why I did this, but I took the charcoal that I was drawing with. I crossed the floor, and I drew on his forehead. Drew a Band-Aid in charcoal on his forehead. And a Secret Service guy sidled up to me and said, "You ever do that again, you'll never draw in this town again." So, I hope he was joking.
Joking or not, Oliphant doesn't end up spending much quality time with the presidents he covers.
I think Pat's problem is that he's afraid if he meets political figures that he'll like them and get along with them and won't be as good at getting angry at them, and feels that that's his job.
The more outrage that I feel, the better it is for me. And he had a dunce hat on, but I thought this other one...
Many of Oliphant's presidential caricatures end up in another, more permanent medium: bronze sculptures. George W. Bush probably won't sit for his presidential portraits until after he leaves office. But people like Oliphant are already shaping his image for posterity.
This is one called Leadership. He has this fool's hat on.
All of the ideas of his cartoons are embedded in those sculptures. They're a summation, in some respects, of everything he has thought about that person as he has caricatured him over time.
In another time or place, Oliphant might face serious repercussions for his work. In 1832, his hero, the French artist Daumier, was sentenced to 6 months in jail for this cartoon of the king. And even today, repressive governments don't tolerate the type of free expression Americans take for granted.
The freedom of the press is very important to us as a nation. I think the freedom to criticize and have different opinions and debate those different opinions is very much the way we think of ourselves.
So, if you want to hang on the walls of the presidential gallery, you have to expect to occasionally be hung in cartoon effigy. If we looked only to the dignified portraits that dominate museum walls, we would come away with an incomplete view of an institution so central to the American story. The pride and ideals reflected in oil must be balanced by the darker side, the disappointment, or perhaps it's the prod to do better, so bitingly expressed in pen and ink.